You as a writer, I want you to pay attention to this. You as a storyteller, I want you to pay attention to this. Because I want you to be free to give us, the public, the character that we need, and not the one that you've been told to write. You, the writer, the storyteller, you've been lied to, and I believe the lie too. Modern storytelling has suffered greatly because of this absolute turd of a dogmatic and religiously held belief, and I'm tired of seeing writers shackled to it like a ball and chain, and Lord knows I was shackled to it for a long time, but this mythic lie needs to be put down like a rabid dog. It's a myth that I think cripples a lot of new writers. It handcuffs older ones. And the newest crop of Hollywood dingbats, my God, they live, breathe, and die by it as it slowly chokes the life out of stories. It's the golden rule of writing, handed down by some guru from Mount Sinai as though God himself had written on tablets of stone, and it's recited by self-proclaimed prophets of writing. And the rule goes somewhat like this: that thou shalt writeth thine characters an ark. They shall learneth a lesson, lest ye be cast into outer darkness. Every character must have an arc. Your character must be a different person or a better person by the end of the story, or you have failed as a writer and you shall be tarred and feathered and run out of town. It is horseshit. The whole damn rule needs to be thrown out. And let me tell you something. Your character doesn't need to arc. They don't need to learn a lesson, and they don't need to become a better person. Now, what I'm about to say is heresy, and I fully expect to be stoned for blasphemy, or at the very least excommunicated, but the character arc is optional. Okay, let me talk about one of my favorite movies of all time. It's Blazing Saddles. It has made its mark on American culture. It is a story that has survived the test of time and the purging efforts of our politically correct purists. And I was rewatching it for probably the 178th time when it suddenly dawned on me that Sheriff Bart has no character arc whatsoever in that film. None. Zero. When that film opens, Bart is fully formed. He's confident, he's smart, he's heroic, he's witty, and he stays that way to the very last frame. And guess what? It doesn't hurt the story, it makes the story. Sheriff Bart does not change. Sheriff Bart changes the world. Bart begins, if you haven't seen the movie, he begins as a black railroad worker, and he's sentenced to hang, and then he's put in charge of Rock Ridge as the sheriff, hoping that the townspeople would revolt against him. He's rejected, but through his wit and his courage, he unites the less than tolerant townsfolk with the minority railroad workers, and they end up working together to defeat the armies of Headley Lamar. That's Headley. And he ends up riding off into the sunset with the Waco Kid. Now tell me, in that film, what lesson did Sheriff Bart learn? What was his arc? And by the end of the story, how is he a better person? There's no change. He changed the town. He changed the situation of the downtrodden minorities, and he opened the eyes of the racist townfolk by being the man he was when the story began. Sheriff Bart's journey is a story arc. It's not a character arc. And his story fits the very definition of the hero's journey, despite the lack of change. And according to the prophets of the writing gods, your hero must confront their flaw. They must be broken by it. They must overcome it and emerge as a brand new person every single time. And it doesn't matter what genre you're writing. If you're writing a Western, a horror, a comedy, a detective noir, or a restaurant menu, they will tell you your hero must arc or your story is wrong. I call horseshit. Because it's not only wrong, it's harmful, and I'll show you why. It might help us if we could define what a character arc really is. Now, this might blow a few fuses, so strap in. A character arc is not just learning something. A character arc is not just changing your mind. A character arc is not just growing a little bit. A character arc is a value change. And a value is not a mood or a attitude or a perspective. It is the moral framework that dictates your decisions. The best example ever of a story with a character arc is A Christmas Carol, and I won't burden you with retelling that one. If you don't know it already, I really can't help you. The point is that Ebenezer Scrooge goes through an actual character arc. At the beginning, he's a cheap, miserable son of a bitch that everybody loves to hate. The grumpy old bastard won't even spring for coal in an English winter, and he hasn't changed the sign outside his shop in 7 years in the hopes that time will erase Jacob Marley's name from it at no cost to him. And by the end of the story, Scrooge has changed. His core beliefs and his values have been replaced by something new. The very foundation of his being, that thing that made him what he was, has so fundamentally changed that we no longer know the man from the beginning of the story. He didn't change his mood. He didn't learn a lesson. He didn't become a little bit wiser. He was born again, reforged, and unrecognizable. That is a character arc, a real arc. That's a Scrooge-level arc. Now, here's the rule that kills the myth. If you can remove the arc and the story still works, then it wasn't a character arc, just a perspective shift. If you remove the character arc from A Christmas Carol, there is no story. And that brings us to a perspective shift versus a real arc. Let me give you two perfect examples here. In the Star Trek, the original series, there's an episode called Obsession. It's aptly named because Kirk becomes obsessed with a monster, a cloud monster that he failed to kill years ago. He gets reckless. He makes mistakes. He learns a lesson about obsession and guilt. But you take away that lesson and the plot still works. The cloud appears, crew investigates, they kill the cloud, they roll the credits. Done. Kirk's values don't change. His worldview doesn't change. He learns something about himself, but his foundation stays solid. Kirk is the exact same man at the end of that episode as he was when it started, albeit he's a tad wiser. That's not an arc. In Star Trek The Next Generation, in an episode called Tapestry, Picard is up against his own past. And the all-powerful Q shows Picard how removing one traumatic moment from his youth, getting stabbed in a bar fight, would have turned him into a boring, timid pencil pusher. Picard gains perspective, but he does not change who he is. His values remain intact, so it's not an arc. Wisdom is not the same thing as a transformation. Now, you might argue that the lesson was the point of the story, and I agree, it is the point, but it's not a character arc. The lesson Picard learns is that he is the man he is today because of the youth he was yesterday. His formative arc is over long before this series begins. He's learned his lessons, he's formed his core beliefs. He has become the man that he will be before he ever set foot on the Enterprise. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not above learning a lesson now and again and becoming wiser and more experienced as life goes on, but there's no more arc for him. He's done. Stick a fork in him. The only lesson Picard learns in this episode is that he was mistaken. His mistake, getting stabbed in a bar fight, was part of an arc he had undergone in his youth. Reforming the foundation of his being changed him into a completely different person. one unrecognizable to the Picard that we knew. His youthful mistake made the man that he is today. Reforming that character arc destroyed him. Picard tells Q that he would rather die the man that he truly is, shaped by his scars, his choices, and even his mistakes, than to live the safe, passionless, compromised version of himself that Q had shown him. Now, there must be an arc, or there's no story. There's an inciting incident, a disruption, a catalyst, a disturbance of the equilibrium, whatever you want to call it, that's what starts the story. The arc, or plot, or story, whatever you want to call it, is the return to equilibrium, the settling of the dust that was kicked up at the very beginning. That's the story arc, the plot, the essence of the tale. The world returning to the old or a new equilibrium isn't a character arc, it's the shape of the plot. Sometimes the hero stays the same and the world arcs around them. Once John Reed puts on the mask and becomes the Lone Ranger, he does not change. He rides across the West delivering justice, not emotional baggage. He never changes. If he did, he wouldn't be the icon that he is today. Shane doesn't change. The town does. Shane realizes he can't change, that the man he is the man the townsfolk need. He can't run away. He must be the man that he is, and he saves the day not by changing, but by realizing that the man he is can bring more change for good than the man he wishes to be. And the story of Shane became a cultural landmark to this very day with no character arc. Indiana Jones doesn't change. The Nazis do, by exploding. And a good example of forcing a character arc on a character that didn't need one is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. There's a lot of reasons why that movie was not as successful as the others, but a forced character arc didn't help any. And Raiders of the Lost Ark is arguably one of the greatest films of all time. No character arc. None. In fact, there's the ongoing joke that you could take Indy out of the film and nothing would have changed. The Nazis' faces would have melted a little bit sooner, but that's about it. Yet, Raiders of the Lost Ark is an iconic film. Why? Indy had no arc, so how did it work? James Bond, classic James Bond, never changes. What would he change into? We don't need a 007 in touch with his feelings. We need a secret agent that can kick ass and take names, or the world could end. And Sheriff Bart, what would he need to change about himself? By being who he is, he saves the town, and he leaves the world a better place. The West needed to change, and he did it. He didn't bend for Rock Ridge. Rock Ridge bent around him. This is a legitimate story structure. It's older than the hero's journey. It is literally the structure of every wandering hero myth in human history. Static heroes are not a mistake. Static heroes are a design choice. Here's a rogues gallery of static titans. You've got Mad Max. Mad Max becomes the man he's going to be in the first film. By the end of that film, he has been forged and hardened into the man he's going to be. The second, third, and fourth films, he has no character arc whatsoever. He's just roaming the wasteland, looking for gas, dragged into other people's battles against his will. Clint Eastwood's character, the man with no name, he has no arc whatsoever. He does not change, and if he did, the story would fall apart. Sherlock Holmes, does he change? No. He simply drags Scotland Yard, kicking and screaming toward the truth in every story. Kolchak the Night Stalker, he's a loud, stubborn, seersucker suit-wearing truth machine who never budges an inch. He believes people have a right to know, and he fights for it. He believes the evidence in front of him, and he acts on it, no matter if the evidence points to a vampire or an alien or an ancient god, and he is dumbfounded by the choices other people make to ignore the evidence and not act on it. He fights for what he knows to be right, and he risks his reputation, his livelihood, and his personal freedom. He never grows, he never heals, he never compromises. He doesn't even change his clothes, and he saves lives because of that. Seinfeld. The entire comedy runs on the premise that the characters never change. Jerry Seinfeld said that executives complained that nothing happened in the parking garage episode, and his answer was, yes, that's the show, and America loved it. My God, if those characters had ever learned a lesson, had ever become better people, there wouldn't be a show. The whole point is that they never learn. They never change, and every week they had an opportunity to better themselves. And if they ever did become better people, the show would suck. Static is not wrong. Static is classic. And if characters went through an arc in every episode of every show in any genre, you'd have a soap opera and no audience. Just ask the CW. Now, let's add 2 legendary women to this mix, because I can hear everybody out there warming up their keyboards to tell me that female heroes must have an emotional journey or some such nonsense. That a female character must change. Again, I call it horseshit. Ellen Ripley, one of the greatest sci-fi heroes ever put on screen, and a character who does not arc. She doesn't need to. In Alien, Ripley is already a competent, disciplined, by-the-book officer. She's the only one on the Nostromo who actually follows regulations. She's the only one smart enough to say, hey, maybe don't bring that facehugger onto the ship. And she's absolutely right. And the tragedy of Alien only happens because everybody else ignores her. Through the entire film, Ripley never changes her core values. She believes in protocol. She believes in survival. She believes in doing the job correctly. She believes in facing danger with clarity and not panic. Those beliefs do not shift 1 inch. The world collapses around her, crewmates die, the creature hunts them one by one, the company betrays them, and Ripley stays Ripley. She never finds inner strength or discovers who she really is. She knows exactly who she is from frame 1. She doesn't need to find inner strength. She already has it. And because she stays the same, she survives. And that's the beauty of Ripley. She is forged before the movie begins. Now jump to Aliens. Different setting, different tone, different stakes, but Ripley is still Ripley. Yes, she shows trauma from the first film. Who wouldn't? But trauma is not an arc. Fear is not an arc. Recovery from a bad memory, that's not an arc. Ripley doesn't change who she is. She applies who she is to bigger stakes. The Marines panic and fall apart. Ripley, she grabs a rifle, duct tapes a flamethrower to it, gets to work. She doesn't grow, she doesn't transform, she doesn't find her voice, she already had one. And the story respects that. If you strip out Ripley's development in either film, Alien still works. The creature hunts the ship, Ripley outsmarts it, the end. Aliens still works. The colony falls, the Marines get ambushed, Ripley saves Newt, blows the hive, drop ship, evac, the end. Her consistency is what makes the plot work. Her lack of an arc is not a weakness. It's a design choice. Ripley is the rock. The world arcs around her. She is proof that a static hero is not only viable, it's iconic. Now, before I leave Ripley, I have to address the nonsense I've heard that Ripley has some sort of character arc concerning her motherly, protective nature toward Newt in Aliens, and this is complete hooey. People who call her bond with Newt an arc are confusing new information with transformation. They're mistaking seeing a new facet of a character for the character becoming a different person. Ripley doesn't change. Ripley is revealed. And that's the whole distinction. She doesn't become a protective figure. She was already a protective figure. The audience just gets to see a new side of her, a facet of her character that we didn't get the opportunity to see in the first film. That's character revelation, character expansion, call it what you will. If it was an arc, Ripley would become matronly through the story, but she doesn't. The moment she sees Newt, she latches onto her. She risks her life for Newt because that's who Ripley is. It's not a character arc. It's a character revelation to the audience. I hope that's settled. Now let's talk about Sarah Connor, because she's the perfect example of when a character does need an arc, and why. At the start of Terminator, Sarah is a timid, reactive waitress sleepwalking through life. She does not drive the plot. The plot drags her by the hair. Every major beat of the movie happens to her, not because of her. She screams, she runs, she survives by the skin of her teeth, while Kyle Reese does the heavy lifting. But in those final moments, when Kyle is down and the tech-noir nightmare is still coming, something breaks and reforms inside of her. The moment she grits her teeth and screams, "Move it, soldier," that is the exact moment Sarah Connor is forged. Sarah doesn't just show courage. She doesn't merely activate inner strength. She chooses to become something new. Up to that point, she's never taken agency. The world has slapped her around like a pinball. But now she decides to take the fate of humanity out of the hands of a T-800 and put it in her own. This is value level change, identity level change. The forging of a worldview. She is not the same woman at the end of that film. The timid Sarah Connor is dead. A soldier has been born. Here's the delicious twist. Could the plot of Terminator still work if Sarah never changed? Technically, yes. Sure. You could write a goofy alternate version where she panics and accidentally crushes the Terminator with pure dumb luck. Kind of a comedy of errors. The plot in a vacuum could still reach a conclusion, but here's the thing, the franchise could not. Humanity could not. The future could not. If Sarah Connor doesn't go through that arc, John Connor still gets born, but Sarah doesn't become the hardened mentor that he needs. She never teaches him survival, tactics, leadership. She never becomes the woman that the future resistance needs. Without Sarah, forged in that hydraulic press, John Connor becomes a daycare casualty the moment Skynet strikes. Humanity falls. Not in 1984, but in 2029. So her arc doesn't just shape her, it shapes the entire future of humanity. This is why arcs are optional, unless they aren't. And when they're necessary, they are necessary for a reason. Sarah goes from civilian to warrior because the story and the world depend on it. If you remove that arc, there's no Terminator 2, no Resistance, no future. Humanity is done for. It's a real arc, a Scrooge-level arc, because the story of humanity collapses if she doesn't change. Sarah Connor undergoes a true character arc because she doesn't merely find courage. She transforms her values. She shifts from passive survival to chosen responsibility. You remove that shift and the story collapses, and that's what makes it a real arc. Luke Skywalker completed his arc in the original trilogy. Goes from fear to discipline, anger to compassion, impulsiveness to wisdom. By the end of Return of the Jedi, he's fully formed. The pillars are set. He's moved from apprentice to knight to mentor. And this is a classic, clear-cut case of where if you remove the arc that Luke Skywalker goes through, there is no story. The Empire would continue to rule. There would be no hero forged to take down the Emperor. After Return of the Jedi, Luke should have become a Jedi Lone Ranger, a wandering knight, a stable character whose worldview is set. Luke could have had his own ongoing series, The Adventures of Luke Skywalker, and we could have seen him every week in a new show, gallivanting around the galaxy in his X-Wing fighter with his trusty sidekick R2, righting wrongs and dishing out justice just like a lot of other serialized characters. because he was done with his arc. He was ready to continue being the hero that the galaxy needed. Man, that would have been such a cool show. And the reason it would have worked was because Luke was done. He was the man he was going to be for the rest of his life. And that's why the Disney sequels felt like character assassination. They tried to arc a man who had already finished arcing. And in doing so, they regressed him, the ultimate sin of character writing. Once the foundation is built, you don't need to tear it down again. You build on top of it. Disney Star Wars, what a shit show. I'm going to leave it alone because that's been done to ad nauseum on this platform. Characters today are forced through required arcs, usually to satisfy some corporate checklist about trauma and empowerment and identity and redemption and emotional journeys and inner demons. The result, Rey from Disney Star Wars. Advertised as a deep arc, she changes about as much as Mount Rushmore. Captain Marvel, no arc. She pretends she does. She pretends she has an arc. And the movie keeps yelling the message anyway. CW protagonists. Arc of the week. Sermon of the week. Nobody cares. Forced arc equals dead story. Let's carve this over the burned remains of the Guru tablets. If removing the arc does not break the story, it was not an arc. Perspective shift, not an arc. Learning a lesson, not an arc. Solving an emotional issue, not an arc. Reconsidering your past, not an arc. If the story survives intact without the interchange, then the interchange wasn't the story. This one rule exposes the fraud of the every character must arc myth. Back to Sheriff Bart. Sheriff Bart does not change. He does not grow. He does not suffer a moral crisis. He does not face his inner demons. He is fully built when he rides in. And by the end, racists have reevaluated their lives. The townsfolk have united. The railroad workers are part of the town. Rock Ridge is healed, except for the Irish. Bart doesn't arc. Bart transforms the world. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the myth laid out and shot full of holes. Now, this has not been me railing against the character arc. This has been me railing against the dogmatic preachers who treat it as a commandment. The idea that your character must arc or you're a bad writer and your story isn't legitimate is complete horseshit. Look all around you for the evidence. Look in every genre from any time in history. There are examples of stories where a character does not change. And in this modern landscape of Hollywood horseshit that we are constantly being shoveled, there are plenty of examples where the presence of a character arc destroys the story, outright wrecks it. Maybe you're one of those writers who has a series or a couple of trilogies in mind, and you have a character whose arc is completed early on. Maybe this is for you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel in every story. Your character is complete. The only thing you can add is wisdom and knowledge and experience. Your character has the foundation of who he or she is. And they're going to have it for the rest of their lives. It's okay. You don't have to force an arc. Let this free your mind, and let this free your characters to be the people that they were meant to be. If your story needs an arc, use it. Arc the hell out of them, man. Do an Ebenezer Scrooge on it. If you think your story would be better if your character learned a lesson, by all means, let them learn a lesson. But if your story works better with a static hero, let them be static. They are not a weakness of storytelling. They are one of its oldest strengths. We need Sheriff Bart as much as we need Ebenezer Scrooge. And you, as a writer, are now free to give us the character that we need and not the one that you've been told to write. The myth is dead. Long live the writer.